Oh,
Like,
I'll put my
yeah.
notepad back up so you get good lighting.
Yeah, so
And
basically,
there we go.
hey, Fred Kennedy, blah, blah, blah. You
Yeah.
know the drill.
Hey, it's Fred Kennedy from. Do you want me to say the radio thing or just do the Star Wars Mud 79?
You can do both.
Okay. What's going on? It's Fred Kennedy. You're watching Two Geeks Talking, and after you're done watching Two Geeks Talking, you should go listen to Mud 79 because it's really good.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Anytime,
All
brother.
right, talk to you later and have a great rest of your weekend.
You too, man.
All right, cheers.
Bye.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Two Geeks Talking is an entertainment industry interview show where we interview the creative people from the comic, film, TV, movie, and video game industries. And of course, I'm your host, Kurt Sasso. I've been looking forward to this interview for a long time, not just because this guest DM'd me and saying, hey, I got an awesome project, but because I have not talked to him in about 6 years, which to me is like an eternity. And to this guest who I love speaking with him about the geekiness and the sci-fi and everything along that line. I first met him back at Fan Expo Canada 2010, actually, or yeah, 2010. And I've been trying to keep up to date with his many projects in the future. He has created a brand new Star Wars story called Mud 79. He is, of course, an incredible person. You know him on Q107, I believe it is. Fearless Fred, I should say, Fred Kennedy, is joining us on the show today. How are you doing today, Fred?
Fantastic, man. I'm
Man,
good. It's good to be back. 2010. That was like my very first con as an exhibitor, actually. I
no,
remember where I was sitting. You know what I remember specifically about that show?
what's that?
This is ridiculous. But that was Adam Gorham and I
Yep.
and Andre Fernandez. We had like two books. We were super stoked that we had done. And we were at the table, and I remember this to this day. I'll never forget it. And I've talked to Ramon about this since then. And we gave our book to Ramon because remember that was when the badges had like the little ribbon underneath
Yep.
by the color where you were. And he had, I think it was pink at the time. And we gave him a free copy of our book, and he started looking at it. And I remember him like that facial expression that he was making, and I remember like, oh, right in the heart. I'll never forget that. I've mentioned that to him so many times since then. Yeah, but I should move on at this point. That was a decade ago. I need to grow up and move on. But I'll never forget it. It was hilarious.
Oh yeah, I honestly, and for me, that was my first time at a Canadian comic convention because for me, I'd just been to Chicago like 3 months before for C2E2 when they first started,
Yeah.
and then I came to Fan Expo, and you were one of my. Your whole table was one of my like I think 80 or 100 interviews I did that 3 day span of that convention. So my voice was just shot by like day three.
That
Uh,
was fun. That was a really fun experience when I look back on it.
yeah,
I was in well over my head, had no clue what I was doing, but I had an end table. Life was good,
yeah,
you know?
totally right. Like those that got that end table, I think many of the people I interviewed back then still have that end table to this day. It's crazy.
Because if you got the end table, they had a deal where they would let you rebook for the next year.
Oh,
So we would always take money, cash from the table, and just before you left on the Sunday, you just go straight to the office and book it for the next year. Because if you booked it that same weekend for the next Fan Expo, they would let you reserve it.
nice.
If you waited, it was very limited to get that end table again.
Yeah.
So we only got the end table because we learned of a cancellation through the inside, you know?
Awesome. Well, let's jump into the interview here. Reminiscing side, and I could talk to you all day about the Comic Cons and all that other
Yeah,
stuff here too.
so could I.
Hey, good times, good memories. That's the main thing, and I look forward to seeing you. Hopefully, the next couple of years, whenever that they do comic conventions again.
Whenever.
Whenever. So it is very rare, like I said before, that I get DMs saying, "Hey, look at my project." For the most part, I'm the one that's usually approaching people, and I'm glad you approached me on this because one, I was bored. I had nothing to listen to, so I work at a computer all day, and so I can throw a Star Wars story, Mud 79, on, and for an hour or however long it normally is, I can lose myself in an incredible story, a great batch of characters, And it makes my day fly by. So I want to thank you for this.
Anytime. Thank you for listening is me thanking you, man.
For sure. It's so let's talk about this project, because this is something that I'm a Star Wars geek. I love these side stories. I love the fact that you've created it feels like canon to me, about a totally underused concept of the Empire, which is the ground troops of, the Mutters. Tell us about how this came about, and a little more about the story.
Well, I've been sitting on the nub of this story for a long time. I'm going to kind of answer that in two parts. I started doing it because I had some comp projects implode, and I still wanted to be creating, and I didn't want to be beholden to any imprint that was beholden to the market. And I've always wanted to write my own Star Wars stuff. I always have. I love Star Wars growing up. That was my first real fandom, like you like things and then you like Star Wars, and it just runs so deep and is so omnipresent. And I've always wanted to create Star Wars, and I didn't want to sit around waiting to tell a story that's been rattling around in my head. So if anything, the pandemic has taught me is like carpe diem, like do what you want to do and just get it done, So I started working on Mud 79, and it all started with this one painting. This was the beginning of the concept of the story. There's this one painting. It's by an Italian artist. I forget the name right now. And it's a painting of this scout trooper that's all muddy, and he's leaning against a tree with an E11S sniper rifle on his leg, and it just has this last man standing kind of vibe to it. And when I looked at it, the story began as, what was it like on the smaller outposts of the Empire when they knew that the Emperor was dead and everything was imploding? And that there's no resupply. That their end game is you retreat or you die. That's it. That's what the end game is for you. And I tried to put myself into that headspace. What must that have been like? And that was kind of floating around with some ideas. And I was like, wouldn't it be cool if they did a show or wouldn't it be cool if? But the concept of like writing it myself never really came to me. And then when I watched Solo, which I think is a movie that took so much heat, but I think it's way better than people give it credit for being, particularly with the ideas being presented in it. And when they showed the Mud Troopers on this planet of Mimban, and Mimban was this planet that was at war, and it was sort of runoff from the Clone Wars is what it was. And that's really where the idea for Mud 79 came from, was that beginning of Solo. And I talked to one of my friends from high school. We've all got like that one buddy from high school that we're still super good friends with. And that's my friend Neil. And we went to Disney World right before the pandemic hit, the very beginning of February. And it was all of us, where all our kids are like 5 and 6 and all that, so they're that perfect age where they buy into the magic, you know what I mean? Yeah. And we all went with like 4 families, 8 kids, and we all rented this one house together. And then we would all go to Disney during the day, and we'd hang out in the house at night and have beers and whatnot. And I started telling him about this raw idea that I had, and he got really supportive about it. Like, he immediately was like, that's awesome. Remember the show Tour of Duty? And I was like, yes, I remember Tour of Duty, which is this terrible Vietnam War show that was made in the 90s when it was like, rah, we're better than the Soviet Union kind of stuff. And I remember like loving that show so much as a kid. And then we were talking about why we liked it, what made it good. And it was that boots on the ground feel. And then the story really like started to take on a life of its own. And that's when I really started hammering down on what I was going to do with Mud 79. And it was going to be a planet that was part of the Republic, but was now part of the Empire. And what would that transition be like? And I didn't want to tell a story. The thing that I get a little bit tired of with Star Wars is 2 things. Number one, when they go to a planet, it's either all jungle or all snow or all desert. I don't like that because that's not the way geology works. Not geology, but like planetary sciences. That's not how planets tend to be. They need biospheres is what they need. That was one of the things that I wanted to make sure that I did when I did this story. And two, I didn't want to have an everybody is super good or everybody is super bad, because if you've done any reading about the imperial structure, you know that the empire is the empire with the emperor in charge, but it's really divided up into a bunch of separate, like almost completely separate and distinct identities. You know what I mean? With the Grand Moffs having control of those areas, they all operate in a different way, and the emperor doesn't care as long as they're all operating efficiently and loyally. So one thing that I take a lot of messages from is that the empire was very xenophobic, all humans all the time. And that is true, but the areas of the empire that we tend to see are all in the core worlds or are featuring ships that just came from the core worlds. When you read the expanded universe, there were lots of different alien races that were part of the empire. And so I started to kind of, because you're really freeballing here.
Yeah.
Like there's no real set rules because the galaxy is so big.
Yeah.
So I sort of imagined that this section of the empire operates with the same mentality that the Roman Empire did, where if it works, use it. Very pragmatic. So if they've got good quality troops, they don't care if they're Mirialan, Twi'lek, human, whatever. They're in the empire. And so once I started building with that, that's really where the story just started coming from. Yeah.
And it's incredible because, I mean, just in the first 2 episodes, because you told me, give it a half hour, and, you know, if you're hooked, you're hooked.
Yeah, I was very blunt. Like, don't put work in.
Yeah.
Don't like drag yourself through it if you're not enjoying it, because this won't be a fun interview.
But no, I gave it the half hour. I finished the episode. I moved on to the next one. I was raiding in Destiny 2, and I was still listening to your show while I was multitasking. So it's a very enjoyable listen.
Yeah. The planet that they're on, I wanted to make it clear that the only reason that there is any hostility with joining the empire and raising that flag is the status quo has been upset and they don't like it. And that tends to be a motivator for conflict here all the time, is when the people are in charge, they will do anything to stay in charge. And when you watch the Clone Wars and you watch, not Rebels because it's the Empire there, but when you watch the Clone Wars, you realize that the Republic is not at all perfect. It doesn't work for everyone. And there had to be a lot of people that were welcoming of the Empire when it happened. Like, inevitably, that's what's going to happen. And so this planet that they're on, Cestin 4, the status quo has been upset, and a lot of the people that were making a lot of money when it was the Republic have now suddenly found themselves not making a lot of money. And when I say that, that means they could be like oligarchs. You know, the average person's not seeing the trickle down of what's coming, and you start to see that in the story. There's one town where the big man on campus, the guy in charge, was a former mercenary. And he came to this town and they were having problems with slavers attacking the farmers in the surrounding areas. And he basically rolls in and is like, I'll solve this problem for you. So he rolls in and he takes down all of the slavers that are operating with impunity because the Republic is so bloated and inefficient. And when he does this, the people of that community really like welcome him and grasp on. And he sort of forms this almost like socialist paradise where he runs the show, but they've got schools, they've got hospitals, they've got food for everybody. Everyone is protected, you know? And I really found playing with all of these things very enjoyable, you know? Because it really gave me an opportunity to build my own Star Wars world taking little nuggets from things that I'd seen in other Star Wars properties.
It's been a while since I've listened to a good radio play. Only because I think the last one I listened to was like a Red Lantern, kind of like a hard-boiled like detective in like the 20s type thing. And it was cool. This just took it to another level between the quality of voice actors you have, the sound effects that really dive you, like really push the story forward, the subtle things like that. I mean, the narration that you go through is just such a joy to listen to, because you really expand the world from one person's perspective. And even though it's a look back on the greenness of him in the beginning to his current state in the latest episodes, I can't stop listening to it, is what I'm trying to say.
The thing with the narration about him being green, I've listened to a lot of war memoirs, and I wanted to have a genuine war memoir feel. And there's so many great war memoirs that have been written. The very first one, and that I read years ago, was With the Old Breed by E.B. Sledge, which is what they based The Pacific on. Helmet for My Pillow and With the Old Breed were the two books that they used. But that book, he talks about a lot with that reflective idea of, I remember how green I was, this is why I started, but when I got there, it was not what I expected. And you get that sense of him and his comrades sort of realizing as they go that this is not at all what they signed up for, because he's like a poor kid. He's on a farmer's planet, and that's a very common thread when you look at people that volunteer for military service. They're in a place where they don't feel they have a lot of options, and joining the army, they can go and see the world and do new things that aren't the best, but they're better than the options that they had. And that came directly from that Vietnam War series. I forget, it was the one on PBS. I forget the guy, Ken Burns. Ken Burns, Vietnam. And there's this guy, and he talks about how, you know, his dad fought in the Second World War. He had an older brother that fought in Korea, and one of his cousins fought there too. And when it was JFK, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country, he has this immediate of, they did it, I've got to go too. And that mentality is clear and present with our main character, Solomon Kwai, who opens up by talking about how I lost two siblings fighting in the Clone Wars, and if I didn't do my part, I was insulting them, you know? And that's a very relatable trait. I was supposed to be in the military, and I failed the medical, and I am the first male in my family that hasn't done military service, and it's kind of embarrassing when all of my cousins, all of my aunts and uncles, not aunts, but all of my uncles and my dad have all done it, and I haven't. It's kind of a little bit embarrassing, but there's nothing I could do about it. So I can relate to that coming from a military background, if that makes any sense.
No, totally. You're right. I mean, the sacrifices of the many and the constant wars that have been fought, at least in terms of recently and since World War I and beyond human history, there's always been a war no matter what. At least with the Star Wars story that you're working on, it feels like almost cathartic in a sense that you're trying to work through what you couldn't accomplish based on this story.
Yeah. There's a psychologist listening that's just going, you hit it on the head right there.
I haven't done this for 12 years without gaining a little bit of insight. But so this is like your apology to your family. I'm sorry, Mom, Dad, aunts and uncles, etc. But this is a next best alternative?
Yeah. And plus doing this, I had... the idea going in that this was not going to be a we're saving the galaxy story. I always, because it feels like saving the galaxy stories have this tendency to just try to one-up each other every time. It's like, well, the galaxy was in danger last time. Guess what? It's in more danger now. And you're like, oh, yeah, here, get the gang back together. Here we go. And it's like, you've heard of the Star Forge? Guess what? This is the Galaxy Forge. Oh, okay. All right. There we go. So I didn't want to do that. I wanted to have small scale storytelling. And I think that that's one of the allures of The Mandalorian, is that at no point do you feel like the fate of the galaxy is on the line. He's just trying to get the job done and look after the kid and keep his things together. And so this story is, they're not trying to save the galaxy. They just don't want to die. Those are the stakes for them. It's like, they don't even really care about the planet, because they all start getting a little bit cynical with the bureaucracy involved, as you do when you're a soldier. You start forgetting about the big picture, and you start thinking more about, well, I could go die tomorrow. I don't want to die. Like, that's the mentality that you tend to get into. And when you start reading more Vietnam War memorials, you'll find that a lot. There's a really good book, Philip Caputo, Rumors of War, and he was one of the first commanders in Vietnam. Like, he went in like in the early 60s, and he's very much open about how they had no idea what they were getting into. Like, they thought they did, and the more they said they knew what was going on, the more obvious it was they had no clue what was happening. And how he started just looking at his men, and all he thought of, I'm just going to try and get all of them home. If I can get them all home, that's all that I need to do. Get them home. That's my job, is to keep these men alive. And it's very emotional listening to this guy and he knows he's only being told half of what's happening. And then he's responsible for all these lives. And the soldiers that he talks to, you can hear the love and respect that these soldiers have for Captain Caputo. They love him. They feel that as long as he's there, they're okay. And I really wanted to create that with our clone trooper, Orto, who is he's the lieutenant of Platoon 79. Like, that's his platoon. And we make that abundantly clear that the soldiers in his command, they are terrified of him. And they don't necessarily like him, but they all have this idea that if he's around, we're okay. As long as he's there, we're going to be fine. And building those relationships and making them plausible and realistic were the biggest challenge when putting it together.
I would think one of the biggest challenges of putting something like this together is to actually get a really good voice cast as well, too. How did that come about?
Oh, Ben? Yeah. Oh, diamond in the rough, that guy. I went through a few ideas with Orto, our cloner. Initially I was like, I don't need a New Zealand accent. I don't need any of that. And then I went through two different people, and none of them were giving me what I wanted. You know, like, I would give them the dialogue and say, this is what I need. And it wasn't there. And I didn't necessarily want the New Zealand accent on there, because I had this idea that not all the clones are going to talk the same. It's a regional thing. It's not a big deal to me. I don't really care that much. But I just put a call out, and a radio announcer from New Zealand shot me a message asking me what I needed. And I sent him the dialogue, and he had a good accent, a very good accent, and his audio was very clean, but it wasn't, his voice didn't punch you. And then one of my friends who actually went scuba diving in New Zealand on her honeymoon, she goes, "Okay, my scuba diving instructor was this guy, Ben, and he has a voice that, like, he's wasting his voice by not doing broadcasting." And I'm like, okay, I'll find this guy. And I sent him the dialogue, and he sent it back. And the first dialogue he sent was the first scene where the soldiers are all sitting around a campfire, because they've been on this planet for a few months, and when they got there, their first job was to build the camp that they were going to be in, which is something that actually happened a lot during the Vietnam War and the Second World War. You drop soldiers in, they'd be like, "Where do we sleep?" "Here, now build a home for yourselves." That's the way it works. So the soldiers are sitting around this campfire, and they're all talking, and one of them starts mentioning how the Jedi were just a hoax. Like, back in the old Republic, they might have had magical powers with the Force or whatever, but come the Clone Wars, it was just hidden secretive technology because they were a secret cabal. And then the lieutenant comes in, overhears this conversation, and it's just like this, no. You know what I mean? Like just this super booming voice. And I was like, I need you to sound like, how are you even having a conversation so stupid when you don't understand? He goes, okay. And he sent me the dialogue back. And the second I heard that first, no, they had something else. They had the Force, and it made them more than human. And it's just like the way he taught. That's not the dialogue, but that's the type of thing that he's saying. And I remember listening to it, and I was like, it was such a profound sense of relief is what it was. And anybody who's like done a comic pitch and you're waiting for the art from the artist and it comes back and it's just like, thank God it's good. Oh, thank God. That's what it was for me, finding him and getting his audio. The other big sense of relief was our Inquisitor, who is voiced by my friend Tony. And Tony she's a radio producer, and she used to work in Toronto. Now she's back home in Jamaica, and she's a Star Wars fan. Right. She loves the Clone Wars, and I knew her years ago, and I messaged her, and I was like, hey, I'm working on this thing. Would you want to play like this Inquisitor? And she's like an Inquisitor? Absolutely. Like that was the bit. All I had to do was ask. She was 100%. I'm in. And so she sent me the audio, and she has just this. I love Tony's delivery, just the way she delivers the lines of the Inquisitor, because out of all the new Star Wars canon, Inquisitors are my favorite. And I was initially not going to have anything to do with Jedi at all in the story. And we don't, but we do, and you'll find out what's happening in the very final episode, episode 12, which drops on January 5th, by the way. You'll see the end of the resolution. There's things, I don't want to give anything away, but there's something that happens at the very end of the second episode that gets resolved in the final episode, meaning you have your moment, you know? So when I had decided to put the Inquisitor in, it was because I think the Inquisitors are the coolest thing that has been added to Star Wars with the Disney takeover. And I will die on that hill that I love Inquisitors. And here's why. Let me have a sip of coffee and I'm going to get into it, because Inquisitors are my favorite thing. So I love Inquisitors because they are Padawan and low-ranking Jedi that are broken by torture, both psychological and physical conditioning. They are broken individuals. And so in my head, an Inquisitor has quite possibly the most profound and powerful connection to the dark side imaginable, because they are literally born by pain and suffering. And they are on the verge. Like, they are a contained storm. And I really liked the Grand Inquisitor in Rebels, but I think the best use of an Inquisitor was in Jedi Fallen Order, the video game with the second sister. And I just think you really got a sense. It's animated, it's CGI, but the eyes, like the mocap on the actress's eyes, you could see that she was struggling to keep it together 24/7. And so in the Inquisitor that we have in the story, Tiberia, her mental state is really danced around. And there is a scene where I take the shackles off. And there's a horrible but enjoyable movie called Unleashed with Bob Hoskins and Jet Li. Yep. And that is the way I envision Inquisitors, is like Jet Li in that movie. If you haven't seen it, Jet Li is this guy who's like, was a kid and trained in Kung Fu and beaten and tortured his entire life. And he got him on a chain. And when they take the chain off, he can do whatever he wants to do. But when they put the chain back on, he goes back to being subservient. And so that, to me, is what an inquisitor really is. You break them, you beat them, and then you open up the cage and let them go. And so there's a scene where, and I don't know if you've gotten there yet, but we let her loose. And then you have to deal with the ramifications of that through the eyes of just a mere mortal like us. And Solomon Kwai, the narrator, has to go through this building that has had her already go through it when she's losing control. And then they find her when she's at this point where there's no one left for her to kill. There's no one left for her to hurt. And she's trying to keep it together. And it has horror elements. It sounds like you're walking through someone's nightmare, because you are. And I think the Inquisitors are the coolest thing that's been added. And if I was in charge of if John Favreau gives me a call tomorrow, this is what we talk about: Inquisitors. Yeah. That's the whole conversation right there.
That's awesome. There is so much that feels unexplored in the Star Wars universe. Like when I was really into, I'm still into Star Wars, but when I was reading the books that they now consider not canon, which in my opinion is a huge misstep on their part, because
Mara Jade, she's the biggest casualty. Keep going.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thrawn is the other one.
Yeah, Thrawn. We can talk about that after too.
Yeah. But still, they have so many great writers and creators and people that have built their career because, like you and I, we're fans of this universe. We are fans of Star Wars in general, because seeing A New Hope for the first time, as a young kid, just really inspires you to do what you want to do. And I'm glad you're finally telling a great story with, of course, Mud 79. And only 12 episodes? Damn you. I mean,
no,
seriously?
It's not. Okay, it's only 12 episodes now. This is the first season. And when you get to the end, you'll the way it ends, it's like, you got to keep going.
Yeah.
You got to keep going from there. I've got the next 3 seasons planned.
Ooh.
And the problem is that it's the time of doing it. It's taxing because it's a lot of work. And you mentioned, and I appreciate you mentioning the sound effects and the production values, because that can be the big tough sell for something like this, is that whenever you say, well, it's a fan fiction creation, people immediately roll their eyes. They really do. And I wanted to overcome that by creating something that is a pro level production. And so when I started researching about how I was going to do this, I listened to Gimlet Media did Wolverine audio play for Marvel, and I listened to it, and this is the only thing that I think that they can say that they put out a better product than me, is that their voice talent is all recorded in a pro studio.
Yeah.
Mine aren't, and sometimes there's audio discrepancies, and that's just going to happen. But I would wager that my production and the quality and immersion that you get from what I did is so much deeper than what you would get on that. And I say that as somebody who's listened to it and dissected the multi-track mixdown that they used, where there's 2 or 3 effect tracks, there's a background audio channel, and then there's they switched with the background music beds and drones and stuff. Right. Dude, I'm running 8 or 9. I post the multi-tracks before I mix them down on social media all the time. So you can just take a look at how deep things are running. And some people they'll throw it on headphones when they're just walking down the street. That's cool. You're not going to miss anything. But if you put it on a car stereo and you're listening to it while driving, or HD noise canceling headphones or something, and you listen to that, you're going to realize that it goes so deep. When they're walking, when they're we're moving through the jungle, and I heard something, you will hear that sound before he mentions that he heard that sound. So you listening are experiencing, from an audio standpoint, what they're experiencing. And when I was creating it, there was 2 lines that were running through my head. Number 1, my radio teacher back in the 90s when I was going to broadcasting school, he had this line when we did a unit on production where we had to make a radio play. And he said, good audio is visual. And the premise is when you hear it, your brain plays it out for you. And you do this without realizing. Your brain's amazing when it comes to sound. Like sound is so important to the way the brain works. When you're laying in bed at night and you hear a sound, your brain will tell you what it is, and you visualize it, you see it, you know what it is in your head. Like that recognition happens. And that's because good audio is visual. And then it was actually just recently I watched that High Score series on Netflix, that documentary series about video games. And one of these early game designers, he said, and it was a throwaway line, and it really hit me. And he said, audio is confirmation. And when I'm telling, like the narrator is telling you the rocket hit the side of the ship, I want you to have that confirmation. Like you're there, you hear it, you know what he's talking about. So I want to confirm what's happening with audio. When I hand you this vial, you hear that little vial plink onto the table and roll across. When we cheers our cups, you hear it. When the gunfire goes, you hear it. And also, side note, nerd moment here. When I say they fired an A280 assault rifle, that's the sound effect from an A280 assault rifle. When I say it's an RPS 8 or an RPS 6 rocket launcher, those are two different sounds. An E11 sounds different than an E10. Its charge noise is different. It's longer and deeper. So I've got all those sounds categorized. And I did it because Star Wars fans love it. We love the minutia. Yep. And you've got to throw the minutia in without limiting or slowing down the story delivery. Mm-hmm. And there's a YouTube channel that I'm a big fan of now called Generation Tech. And a lot of things that I've been unsure of how to wade in, I'll watch their videos, and I don't necessarily go, that's got to be the way it is, it's gospel, because they're reaching on things too. But they're a great pointer in the direction of how I should approach the way certain troopers react with other troopers, you know?
Back in university for me, it was film production, but we had an audio segment as well. Where we had to create our own, like, I think it was like a minute commercial or something like that, or it was interactions with whatever. And so for me, I mean, I had my podcast set up and all this other stuff, so I was already ready to go for all of that jazz. It wasn't until a fellow classmate said to me, okay, I need an Australian accent talking about barbecuing pigs. It worked out for the whatever they had. It was like a cross between a person calling into a radio chat show and a psychologist for sex therapy or something like that.
Classic combination.
Exactly. Yeah. Great for university. Anyhow, that aside, the detail of the sound effects that you put into this, even if it's for a millisecond or a second or however long it is critical to the story. I love that you take the time as a producer, as a creator, and you're doing this type of information for them, because it is all about that show don't tell. In this case, it's all about the listen don't tell.
Yeah,
like it's necessary.
So, it's got to feel breathed in and lived in. It's got to feel real to the characters that are in there and the way they're explaining it and talking about it. Because if I can't put the characters over, I'm not going to put any of the listeners over either.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that the more you don't want to over detail it so you drown things out, and that's the real challenge, is not doing too much, because you can overwhelm it with like blah blah sound effects of guns going off, but is that the most important thing that's happening? And do you remember the original VHS release of Star Wars?
Yep, I have it.
When it came, that it was that CBS video release, and it also, if you could get like an add-on little documentary with it, and it was called From Star Wars to Jedi.
Yep.
And in that documentary, which I think was the very first, which is the equivalent of like DVD bonus footage.
Yeah.
But like that was the first time that I'd ever watched anything, and I like dissected it because I was such a big Star Wars kid. This is when I was 9 years old.
Yeah.
And the George Lucas talks about how special effects are a means of telling a story. The line is, special effects are just a means of telling a story. It's a tool. A special effects with no story is a really boring thing. And one of my complaints that I would have with the prequel trilogy, and I still really enjoy the prequel trilogy. Dude, I love the Last Skywalker. I love it all. Like, I love everything.
Yep.
The Rise of Skywalker, sorry. I feel like the story suddenly became a means of doing special effects and not the other way around.
Yeah.
So I didn't ever want to have the story become a means of me going overboard with like a crazy special effects, audio effects sequence. If you listen, there's never more than like a 1 or 2 second interlude of an effect or a sound that's happening. And if there is, it's designed to create tension in the listener. There's a scene it's the 10th episode. Actually, yeah, it's the 10th episode, which drops on Tuesday, so it hasn't even happened yet. Oh, nice. I'll give you a little bit of a tease.
Spoiler, I like it.
It's not. This isn't a plot spoiler because it's something that's been mentioned already, so it's nothing new. But there is a point where they're talking about these 4-winged flying reptiles called Wendehu, and Wendehu are very big, very aggressive, and very good hunters. And they're at this point where they see Wendehu and they're trying to figure out what to do. And so I talk about how it was gliding past. And if it's visual, like let's just say I'm telling it in a movie or a TV show, I can show them hunched on the ground, looking up, all tense and scared. And then I can show, and I don't even have to show the Wendehu. I can just show shadow going over them. And you get the impression of how big it is and how scared they are based on looking at them. But without the visuals, I only have audio to do it. So how do you do that? How do you solve that problem? Because every scene's got to have a problem and a solution. So I created an effect for the sound of them by taking a crocodile. And the way a crocodile will, like, they'll do that, like, purr under the water, like that. And then what I did was I dropped the pitch and stretched it out so it sounds really deep. Nice. And it's like it sounds, I don't even know why it works this way, but when you hear it, my instant reaction was that would eat me. that was my hearing this sound. I was like, that caveman brain, that like all the hardwired DOS programming going back thousands of years immediately goes, watch out, that's going to eat you. So for me, putting that piece of audio in the story, the guy's like, we saw shadows moving overhead and everything got quiet. Then we heard it. That sound. And you're just like, you as the listener are like, guys, don't move. Stay still. Don't move anywhere. Bad things are going to happen to you. So that's been the hardest part with doing it. And also the other hard part is like getting people to listen. It's the other hard part. Because I did the audio thing because I was like, well, you know, when you send somebody a comic pitch, they've got to actively read it. Mm-hmm. With audio, I can just be like, man, just put this on your aux channel in your car when you're driving home. Throw it on your headphones when you're going for a walk. Just give it a listen, and then you can just listen as you go, with the idea being to hook it in. So that's why I'm really going overboard with those effects is if I've got somebody passive listening, I want to draw them right in, you know?
We can talk about everything when it comes to this story because it's so
honestly
deep,
this is the first time I've gotten to talk about like the really technical aspects of creating the sounds, and I appreciate it a lot.
That's all. I'm surprised actually, because you figure with the amount of work that you've put into this, especially with these fine details that you're doing, that it would be something that people would be asking about, because I mean it's a critical aspect, and we've already spoken about this, but you have a large cast of voice actors, literally like a huge cast of voice actors for this. you talked about one with the truly incredible scuba diver that should be on the radar.
Yeah.
Truly,
Yeah.
even I went, man.
He's got some great scenes at the end of the story because you start having a lot of like psychological problems within the unit, and it really takes a good leader to address those. And my dad was a lifer in the military, and I actually talked to him about the ways they deal with combat stress and all that with young soldiers in particularly, because he explained to me that you deal with different experience level soldiers in completely different ways as you sort of take them down the staircase, was the reference that he used. He said, he goes, it's a staircase, and the farther down you go, he goes, not everybody's going to even be able to get to the bottom of the stairs. He goes, you know, you've got to learn where to stop them. But that's a great scene with Ben. And then the first people that I signed on, Sean Hatton, who plays Zevin Murray, who is the comms officer, who's a Toan, who are an alien race that are very human-like, but they are different internally with their internal organs. Sean Hatton I got right away because Sean's a big Star Wars fan, and he's also just one of the best people in the world.
Nice.
And then I got my friend Carly, who works on 102.1 The Edge in Toronto, because I wanted people I knew understand how to make audio sound good. But actually, I can't believe I forgot to say this. So whenever you're starting a new creative endeavor, you kind of waffle a bit as to how committed you really are to doing it. And I waffled with how committed I was to doing it. And so Marilla Wex, she voices Sergeant Gentala, and she has a phenomenal voice because she's a pro voice actress and actor, sorry. And she has done lots of works with lots of video games that I can't say which video games they are, but if you listen to her voice, you should pick it up. Some of them maybe involve assassinating people. And so I've known Marilla for years, and I just shot her a message being like, hey man, if I was doing a Star Wars radio play, would you want to be in it? And then I'm like, I need to emphasize, there is no money involved. I have no money. And you're a pro, and if you don't want to, don't at all feel bad. I just want to know. And she wrote back 5 minutes later being like, absolutely, I'm in. And I'm like, well, I guess I got to do it now. And so when Marilla said yes, she was really the catalyst to make me think that I could do it. So that's when I started putting it all together. And Marilla, like, her voice, oh my God, she's so good.
Amazing, yeah.
A Canadian voice actor, who's not just a voice actor, he's an actor, Elias Toufexis, who was in The Expanse.
Yep.
He does a voice in the final episode. And when I messaged him and told him what I was doing and what I needed, and then I showed him a bit of spec art that's being done for the scene.
Nice.
His reaction was, whoa, that's me? And I went, yes, that's you. And he goes, 100%. So he's in it, and he's going to do a voice in it. And it's been a lot of people that have, like I post a lot about it on Imgur, and I've had people being like, oh, can I do a voice for it? And then what I'll get them to do is do group loops, which is like a term for, combat Foley, like over there, grenade out, all that kind of thing. And so whenever there's combat sequences, you hear a lot of that. Like there's a scene in the final episode I was just working on it. Conor McCreary, if you're listening, Conor McCreary, creator of Kill Shakespeare, and he's got a new book coming out from Boom in January. I forget what it's called right now though, but great guy.
Yep.
And he gave me so much audio when I asked him if he would do some group loops for me, and he's got this great medic like that, like I'm dying, and I've been waiting to use that piece because it's so awesome. And there's a scene where, and I don't know if I subconsciously tweaked the scene to use this piece of audio, because the guy's like, we came across like a firefight, and then when the firefight wraps up, he goes, I could hear somebody crying for a medic, and I'm like, oh, here's your big moment, Connor, and I threw that in there. So Connor did so many really good sounds that he dies. I've killed Connor like 40 times easy. And there's my other friend, Adam Ricard, he's on the radio in St. Catharines at Hits FM.
Mm-hmm.
And he gave me a whole bunch of bits of audio like that too. So those two guys, and this one girl, Natasha, those three people have died for the Empire hundreds of times.
They sacrificed themselves gloriously.
Yeah, man. The cast has been pretty difficult. Not difficult to wrangle. Just I've got to be very conscious because I know that diversity is like a big topic of discussion right now. And I at first was one of those guys who really got my back up and got very defensive about the idea of, oh, so you're only going to pick somebody based on the color of their skin or the sexual orientation or anything like that. I can fully admit that I was somebody like that. And then one of my friends who's Black was explaining to me how growing up, she wanted to like Star Wars. She goes, I liked Star Wars, but there was no one for me to identify with in there. And then I was like, it wasn't a listen to me conversation. It was a, do you want to know why conversation? And then she explained it to me and I went, got it. And so I've been very conscious about making sure that I keep gender parity and racial parity, meaning that I want to have the cast to be 2/3 people of color and 50-50 male, female, and we have a non-binary actor in our production as well. And I want to keep it as open and inclusive to everyone as possible. And I think that there have been times where it would have been very easy for me, because I work in a radio station where there's lots of microphones and people that know how to use them, to just go down the hall and get someone to be like, can you hop on the mic and roll tape on these lines for me? But I've taken it upon myself to just go that extra step to try and seek out people that don't look like me, that don't look like anybody that has appeared in the Star Wars universe before. And I think that Star Wars is, in terms of degrees of difficulty to include, it's the easiest because they're not even voicing humans. it's so wide open. You can do, Star Wars is one of those properties where there's no excuses to be like as inclusive as absolutely possible. It's just, that's what makes it so great. And I think maybe if I do like a Cold War drama, it would be a little bit more difficult. But for Star Wars, which is what I'm doing, it's very easy.
And it's really great to hear and listen. And I hate to say it, I have like, I guess 4 more episodes to listen to before your episode 10 comes out. So
Dude, you didn't even start until like 2 weeks ago, so you get a pass. Like, you get a pass.
But I feel guilty because interviewing you, it's just like I've enjoyed it so much, but because of work, there's only so much I can listen to. But to me as an interviewer, it's like, I really love this. I want to give Fred the best interview I possibly can because I love.
You let me talk about like audio production. That's fandom right there, buddy. When you're talking about like finding it difficult to find time to listen to it, like I totally get that because I feel like I created this, going back to what we first talked about. I created it because I got my feelings hurt when a few greenlit projects got imploded because of COVID. And so doing something with audio, which is something that I can do, I don't need to pay an artist to do it. I can do the heavy lifting on this myself. But you forget that no one's commuting anymore. So no one's throwing those things on when they're driving. And it's like, I feel like, oh, I got ahead. And it's like, oh, but did you? So now it's like, I'm like, well, listen to it while you're at home. I can't really listen to things when I'm at home either. Like, I listen to podcasts and books on tape and stuff when I drive. That's when I listen to that stuff. Or when I'm out for a walk. But even when I'm walking, I like to listen to the sounds of nature and cars that might hit me. So, I too am not really listening. I get it. I totally get it. But I'm glad that you are listening. And I hope that other people will start listening too. Because and maybe I'm close to it. I'm in the forest, you know what I mean? But I feel like there's nothing like it out there. I think it's a completely unique thing.
I think so too. And to be honest, I could see this as an audio book or an audio series on like Audible. I that quality is there. So I put you and your work up there with like a Neil Gaiman and all that other stuff. So I see value in what you're producing and creating. And it's not just because it's a fan project, so to speak. It is a high quality project. It's not a fan project. So
it's like, this is what I do for a living.
Exactly.
This is literally my day job. I'm just doing my day job on spaceships now, rather than depressing stories about COVID statistics. So it's much more enjoyable.
Yeah. So I know we're running out of time. I like I said, I could talk to you for hours on this, and I want to get you back on the show next year.
Right before when it ends.
Yes.
Okay, tell you what.
Yes.
When you finish the final episode, we'll do a big retrospective, and you can ask me all the questions that you have had, and it'll be a spoiler discussion. And yeah, I'll answer anything you want to know, because there's a lot of things that were in the fire and have been pushed back to the second chapter. I'll even tell you about the plans for the sequel series that I've done, because you know what it's like. You just start thinking. I have a sequel series planned, which is very different but very similar, that we can talk about too.
Now, if you're doing an all Inquisitor series,
that's hard.
I want you on.
Yeah. Okay. No, it's just listen to the rest of the series and we'll talk. We'll talk.
All right,
okay.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm digging right now. All right.
Yeah. I don't want to ruin anything for you.
Yeah, that's fine. Everyone has one or two people that kind of inspired them on their path to where they are today. Who was that for you?
This is going to sound like a weird roundabout thing, but Kevin Smith, I always have to say, is the man. And here is why. When I first came to Toronto, I was not a well-liked radio personality because the station, The Edge, let go of two very long-time employees to hire me. So I was a target for those people's fans. One of those people, Martin Streak, fell victim to suicide, and a lot of the blame for that was placed on me, that had he not been fired, that wouldn't have happened. Therefore, it's Fred's fault. Not to get heavy, that's just what happened. And so I'm a very emotional, sensitive guy, and I took a lot of that negativity to heart. And when I first got to Toronto, it was very rough for me. And there's a guy, Dean Blundell, who's a radio announcer in Toronto, and there's a lot of people that don't have very high opinions of Dean, and I have a very different opinion because I know him on a personal level, and I will always love the guy because I think he's a great human being at heart, and he wants the best for the people around him. And he saw how much of a rough go I was having, and he really did his best to take me under his wing and to make sure that I was as happy as possible. And he used to do this event called the Sausage Fest, which was this massive party and barbecue, and Kevin Smith was there. And I was talking with Kevin Smith because Dean brought me into like the green room so that I could hang out outside of the crowd with all like the VIP people. And I had a big conversation with Kevin Smith about Superman and about Star Wars. And when I talked to him, I said, you know, man, I really want to start writing comics. And I didn't even finish the sentence. And this is what Kevin Smith said to me, and it is one of the biggest catalysts in my life. He goes, why aren't you writing comics now? And he said it just like that. Like, why aren't you writing comics now? And I was like, well, you know, because. And he's like, if you want to write comics, the only way to do it is to write fucking comics. Like, because he said it like him. Like, he drops the F-bomb. He's like, the only way to do it is to write fucking comics. He just says it so blunt. And I can guarantee you, he doesn't remember that conversation. It's water under the bridge for a guy like that. Doesn't care at all. Doesn't care. But for me, at the time, where I was, it was like I was in a pit and someone threw a rope down. And after that conversation, I fell so deep into writing, and I was getting so much off of my chest and out of my head. Like, we carry around negativity in our heads, and I find that when you write it out, you're pulling stuff out, you know? You're pulling it all out of your head. And for me, it was very therapeutic, and it started as just a strictly therapeutic exercise and became doing like indie comics for the last like 11 years. And Adam Gorham would be the other inspiration, because whenever and that's like on a personal level, whenever I'm second guessing, I'll send things to Adam. I've sent pitches out that didn't even get a response, and Adam's response will be like, that imprint approved something that's not nearly that good, and they only did it because the editor likes the person that pitched it. Like, there's nothing wrong with this pitch. This is an amazing story. And having a friend like that who has no qualms about just throwing their dick on the table and being like, this is how it is very inspiring, because it takes a lot of like internal courage to be able to be like that. And so Gorham is a huge inspiration and just an incredible friend.
Totally.
And I wouldn't be here doing this, talking to you right now, or have done Mud 79 without Kevin Smith chirping me years and years ago. Not even a chirp, just no one had said that to me before. Like, I thought you had to like wait until Bill Marvel called you and it's like, hey, you should write comics. And yeah, so no, that's Kevin Smith did that.
From a professional standpoint, you are an amazing radio host. You have done comics. You have a great group of friends and are, married with kids. And you've done everything that to your heart's content from a professional standpoint. Do you consider yourself personally successful?
No, not at all, actually.
Wow.
It's not just in my head. What is success, really, when you think about it? No. The thing is you set goals professionally, and then when you achieve them, you suddenly need to set a new goal, and then you need to set a new goal. And so I have in my life never set the biggest goals. I always set goals that I'm pretty confident I can get to. I could get there. And then when I started doing comics, I was like, the goal is to do a Silver Surfer story. That's the goal. And have I had successes? Yes. Now, don't get me wrong. If I got asked to write a Star Wars story, that would rival the Silver Surfer story. There's just no question. But until I've done like a canon Star Wars story or a Silver Surfer story, I don't know if I would consider myself successful, because I think that considering yourself successful is pretty dangerous, because once you start thinking I'm a success, you start thinking you're like untouchable. For me anyways. I don't consider myself a failure though. I just don't consider myself successful, because I think people that call themselves successful are less motivated. And that's just me. That's not me passing judgment on anybody else. It's just, I will never consider myself successful. I'm just somebody that I am aware that I've had a lot of successes. I just don't let that get in the way of where I want to go. I'm not looking in the rearview mirror. Eyes on the road, like I'm driving on the Autobahn. You know what I'm saying?
Well, the reverse of that then is failure. How do you deal with your failures?
Oh, well, I got a lot of experience with that. The thing with failure is you don't dwell on it, but you analyze it. Like the thing that I dislike at comics is the worst for this, is when the no is no response. I hate it. Drives me bananas. I think that's the most disrespectful thing you can do. And yes, I realize that comic imprints get like dozens of pitches a day. I get it. But they've also got dozens of editors that are going through those pitches. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility to just hit reply and say, sorry, this doesn't fit with the direction we're going in right now. In radio, we call it the compliment sandwich. And the compliment sandwich is start with a compliment, give the harsh stuff here, finish with a compliment. And I get at least one demo from a radio student a day, at least. And those demos are about 3 minutes of audio and a letter saying, hey man, I really want to be in broadcasting. What am I doing wrong? And if I can find the time in my day to give that kid not just the 3 or 4 minutes to listen, but listen and then give constructive feedback, there's no excuse. There's just no excuse. I think it's insulting is what it is. But I think I just shot myself in the foot for getting some gigs there. But I don't like the no response. I love, and there's an editor from, her name is Ariel, and she works at Skymount, and she's the best, and she'll respond to everything. And when you send her a pitch, she'll go, here's why it doesn't work for us. That's all anyone wants, because that teaches you not to waste their time with something you know wouldn't be good for them next time. So when you get those, it didn't work, analyze, learn, move on. It doesn't matter. Like, I think that people get too precious about their ideas. If you don't like my pitch or you don't like what I sent you, I got something better I got something in the back seat that's better than that right now. I'm on it right now. I've already moved on. I'm on. Find something else. Like, don't dwell, learn and step forward is how you learn from your successes. I got fired from every radio gig that I had for the first 4 years I was in broadcasting. Every single one, I got fired. And then I worked at a radio station in Winnipeg called Power 97, and the guy who ran it, Steve Parsons, I went in every single day for 3 weeks, and I had a new resume and a new demo disc, because this is when you burn CDs. Mm-hmm. That's how old this is. And then I had a new CD and a new resume, a new cover letter, and I went in every day for 3 straight weeks. And every day I'd go to the door, and they would say, yeah, you can't come downstairs. You're not allowed downstairs. He's too busy to see you. Sorry. And I went back the next day, and I did that every day for 3 weeks. And it was the Friday of the third week. And I kind of in my head being like, if this doesn't work, I don't know what I'm going to do. And I went in at a different time than I normally had been going in. And the receptionist who was at the front desk wasn't the normal receptionist. She was his personal secretary, and her name is Diane Forsberg. And to this day, I swear to God, when I say this, I don't know if I would be here right now if not for her. Because when I put the disc down, she looks up, she goes, oh my God, you're the guy. And like, I'm the guy. She's like, you're the guy that keeps coming in that he won't see. That's amazing. And I'm like, is it amazing? She's like, oh, it's hilarious. It's hilarious. And so then she calls him on speakerphone, and she's like, the guy's back. And he goes, tell him I'm busy. She goes, you're on speakerphone. He heard you say that. Now you have to come talk to him. And so then he came up and he talked to me. And I remember him saying, he sat down and, okay, like, imagine you've been doing like indie comics for like 3 or 4 years. And then you get to sit down with Todd McFarlane or Jim Lee. You get to sit down with Jim Lee, and Jim Lee goes over your portfolio. Can you imagine how suddenly awful your art looks to you? Like, that is the way it's going for me, listening to my AM 800 small town Canadian radio demo with this guy in his office. And it is the most humiliating experience of my life. And I can see, remember I talked about Ramon rolling his eyes at my first comic? It was like that to the power of 10. And then he stops it and he goes, okay, you're not where you need to be on air here. And your life is going to come down to a few individual moments. And if you don't recognize that this is your time, it's going to pass you by. And I remember this, and I must have looked like a psycho. And I leaned out and I put my hand on his desk, and I was just like, listen, I know I'm not where I need to be on the air at Power 97. I know that I'm not. But I can't go back to another small market and work for some guy that's just going to tell me I suck every day and that I need to just read community events liners. And I know how to do formatics. I know how to run a show, but I don't know how to bring my personality onto the air. And I can't learn that in a place like that. I need to be around people that do it every day. And if you give me a job, I will do anything. I will do anything you ask me to do. I will mop the floors. I will pull CDs. I will pull commercials for the next show. I will do anything. Just please don't make me go back to another small market. And I had this like, and I remember him looking, and I still talk to this guy. Steve Parsons is still one of the guys in my life that when I need career advice, he's one of the people that I tug on his cape. And I remember his dry look goes, hold on. He picks up the phone. We still looking for a board op? Yeah. No. Call that guy back and tell him he's fired. I got a guy here. No, I don't care. He's the guy. Hangs up the phone. That night I was being trained. Like, that was it. That was, yeah. I don't know how I got on that tangent, but that was like how you deal with failure. You keep refusing to admit that it's failure, you know? I think that's the moral of that story. That was a long answer, and I apologize.
Oh, that's good. I've been asking these questions, and we'll get to the final one in a second, but I've been asking these questions literally for the past 10 years. That's the best answer I've heard in 10 years.
Dude, I wish I could take a photo of Steve Parsons' I don't care expression to show you. Like, when he hired me, it wasn't like you're the best guy. It was like, fine, I'll give you a job. It was, and this is the job, so everyone knows. This was the job. I operated voice tracks on the overnights, meaning somebody else pre-recorded a show, and then I played the MP3s and pulled the CDs and played the music. Like, that's how long ago this was. Like, I played the audio files of somebody else talking that weren't even MP3s. They were on a cart, which is like an 8-track. So I would play their audio and then mix CDs. That was the job. I didn't even get to go on air. I was just in the studio pushing buttons for 5 hours from midnight till 5 a.m. when the morning show came in. Oh. That was the job. That was my major market radio debut.
Hey, everyone has to start somewhere. I mean, truly.
Wasn't even starting. I'd already been on air for 4 years at that point. That was the beginning for me. That was the first station where I left and wasn't fired. To put it all into perspective, if you want to know. That's the very first one.
The younger generation is looking at your work and they're becoming inspired to be creative in their own right, either through creating radio shows like what you've done with Mud 79, or becoming maybe radio hosts, or doing something in the audio field, etc., or maybe even comics for that matter. How can they inspire the generation that follows them?
Just be nice, man. That's really all it is be nice and give people your time. That's what I always say is, like, I feel like the internet has trained people to look and interpret things in the worst possible way. Like, don't take a second to think, why would they say this? Just look for an opportunity for you to come in and A, prove you're better, or B, prove they're dumb. And I feel like that's the way the internet has trained people to communicate. And it drives me crazy because I feel like we're missing out on a lot of potential friendships, creative partnerships, allegiances, if you want to use that term. And there's a great example of how, if you just take a second to do some analysis on not what's being said, but why it's being said, you'll realize that the story is a lot deeper than you expected. And Sarah Silverman, years ago, I love Sarah Silverman. For all of her faults, I think she means well. She wants nothing but the best for everybody. She said she was online and some guy tweeted her about how awful she was, and I don't forget what he said, but it was the usual, you're a dumb woman and your opinions are all stupid. Yeah, I think he threw something in about her being Jewish in there too. And normally people will do two things. They'll counterattack or ignore. I tend to ignore. But she responded with, I know you wouldn't say this unless you're expressing a lot of pain. Why don't you tell me what you're really trying to say? Like, why are you so hurting? And that's all she did. That's all she did. And the person responded by saying that they needed back surgery. Their benefits didn't cover it. They didn't have health insurance to cover it. And they were in agony every single day. And there was nothing they could do about it. And she paid for the guy to get physical therapy, and she paid for the guy's medication. And guaranteed turn this guy's life around. And that is like a little nutshell, just a little nutshell about like if you just take the time, because like that we always see people post these motivational memes of everyone's fighting a battle, you don't know what their problems are. It's like, why don't you follow that advice, man? Like, stop posting the meme and do it. And her doing that was like a great example of if you just take the time to ask, maybe they're not even attacking you, they're just venting from something else that happened in their day. And there's a great children's book that Madonna wrote, interestingly enough, where she talks about, and it's like, I don't know if it's a folktale, maybe it is a folktale, but it's about these kids that spread rumors about this old man that lives in their village. And then the premise is that this old man takes one of the kids and he has a pillow, and it's a feather pillow, and he slices it open and he shakes it open during a windstorm, and the feathers blow everywhere. And then he says, I want you to take this pillowcase and gather up all the feathers. And the kid's like, I can't do that. They're impossible. The leaves are gone. And he says, that's what happens when you say things about people. Once you say it, it's out there and you can't ever get it back. So be mindful when you open your pillowcase. And it's just, that's it. Just stop talking shit about everybody. Just be nice, you know? Just be nice. Be excellent to each other, as Sean Hatton always says. Just be excellent to each other. If you want to inspire other people, be an example that should be, imitated. Just be nice. It's really all it is.
If we could just be all Keanu Reeves, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, man. Well, we can't all be millionaires.
Yes.
Like, here's the thing. Keanu Reeves has no excuse for not being the greatest guy ever. He doesn't even have a mortgage. Like, he's never worried about paying his bills. Like, and so he does all these great things, and when he does these great things, I'm always like, I would love to do that too. I'd love to go buy guys motorcycles. I can't afford to, but I would love to be in a position where I could. And I don't want people to think that I'm dumping on Keanu Reeves, because if there were more Keanu Reeveses, like, could you imagine if Jeff Bezos was Keanu Reeves? Like, oh my God, we'd all have motorcycles. Like, all of us, everybody in the world would have a motorcycle. That'd be fantastic.
Or pay the mortgage, whatever works.
Yeah.
I hate to say it though, Fred, that ends this particular episode of Two Geeks Talking. I want to talk to you about your stories coming forward. Once you get to that last episode, we will have a spoiler-filled Mud 79 episode on Two Geeks Talking.
Okay. January 5th is when it drops.
Perfect.
And I recently set up a Twitter feed for Mud 79. At Star Wars Mud 79. And I did that because when anybody was like, where can I find it at? I was like, well, you got to Google these 4 words. So this is just easier. It's on Twitter, Mud 79, or you can follow me on Instagram, fearless_Fred. I'm always posting content there. I actually just posted, I post a lot of stuff on my stories. I post little teasers of things that I'm working on as I'm working through it. So I actually, earlier this week, posted a scene that I think is the most well-produced thing that I've ever produced in my life. And I got my wife down and I was like, listen to this, it's so great. She's like, it sounds really good. Can you make the kids lunch? That was her response.
So that ends this particular episode of Two Geeks Talking. Of course, you can find this interview as well as almost 1,000 interviews on tgtmedia.com, of course, twogeekstalking.com. That's the word 2, not the number 2. Our YouTube channel is youtube.com/c/TGT And you can find me on social media at Kurt Sasso. And thank you everyone for listening and watching to Two Geeks Talking, where everyone has a story to tell and it's up to me to help bring it out. Thanks for listening. Hey all, Kurt Sasso here from Two Geeks Talking. If you like this video and these quick clips here, make sure you take a look at our YouTube channel, youtube.com/TGT Make sure you hit the like button and subscribe as well. Hit the bell to make sure you get notifications, of course, from videos like this here. Thank you everyone for listening and watching over the years, and keep listening and watching for new and exciting interviews with talented and creative people in the entertainment industry. I'm your host, Kurt Sasso. Thank you so much.